I got asked over there on the X machine, would you smoke weed with Snoop Dogg? Hello, sunshine. I'm Alexi Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This show will be talking U.S. Olympic women moving on, U.S. Olympic men moving out. Stu Holden guest hosting. Oh, yeah. Dougie Mack as a guest. Charlie Trotter, boy bands, Dirty Pop, Tim Ream, Leagues Cup, Spain's secret sauce, Snoop. Is America failing at soccer? And so much more. But first, joining me as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light. No, not David Mossey. Yes, back for yet another show. As I mentioned, Stu Holden has come in, filling the breach here. We found out right before we were going to go to air that David Mossey, who we had told us he was flying up to Seattle to have a little R&R up there, evidently his flight was canceled and he was not able to get there and then get on the show. So we said, let's get somebody who's incredibly good looking and incredibly talented. And we couldn't get that person. And so then we said, let's get Stu Holden to come in. So welcome, Stu. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. I can just hear Mossy saying there, David Brenner of our podcast is back again for another appearance. I saw your name pop up with a text this morning, Lex, and always happy when the bat signal goes up to fly in here and fill in for the wonderful David Mossey.
He's got big shoes, but we love it when you come in here because you're pretty good. You're pretty good. I'm going to give you you're pretty good.
We'll see.
Have you watched anything, my friend, over this summer that is of interest?
So you guys know I'm a big Love Island guy. I watch a lot of Love Island, and you all know, if you're a listener of this podcast, that Alexi and I were very busy this past summer with the Copa America and the Euro. A new episode of Love Island came out, a new season. And my wife, who's my partner in watching this, decided while I was on the road to watch it without me. So here I am now with the dilemma. Do I watch Love Island by myself and I just binge it? Because the American one's gotten really good now. Lots of good drama. And she said it was one of the best seasons, but she watched it without me. So I'm left alone to think about that. I've been watching a lot of Olympics, though, man. I'm just gobbling up the Olympics. I love it. I do, too. I'm like Team America, like all the feels, standing there, national anthems.
Did you see they teased today that flag football may be
it is coming, right? Yeah. I think it's going to be for the LA one. Yeah.
I mean,
what, should we enter a team? Like, should we try out?
It's not a sport anymore now in the Olympics. Like Olympic podcasting should be something like that.
What about you?
Well, first off, I mean, it's a fine, I would think, a marriage fine for her to go ahead and watch the entire thing without you. I mean, that was kind of...
It is, but, I don't want to take this one up with her because I was away from the house for 5 weeks, and she was like at home with the kids.
There,
yeah, I think if I raise that one, it's going to get slammed down by the jury.
I have two things. Two documentaries. One is called Dirty Pop. It's on Netflix. It's about Lou Pearlman, who was the manager, the founder, the talent scout, if you will. He discovered Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. He ended up being not a very nice person when it comes to the finances. He ended up getting, he went on the lam and all that kind of stuff. But it's an amazing look. Were you a Backstreet or an NSYNC guy?
Yes.
Both. It doesn't matter. So it's right in your wheelhouse in terms of that time and everything that was going on and all the different boy bands and all that kind of stuff that happened. And he ended up, it ends up being the longest Ponzi scheme in American history that he was responsible for. So it's a fascinating look, both in terms of the business of boy bands and all the boy bands that he had, but also the finances and how bad he was. The other thing is something called Love Charlie, which is Charlie Trotter. Are you a foodie? I know you run around with your friend over there, John Strong, and he is a foodie.
He's a major foodie, yeah.
All right, so Charlie Trotter was an incredible chef, and Charlie Trotter's was a place in Chicago, one of the great restaurants of the world, and it goes into all the way that he became a chef and how he created this restaurant and what he did. A lot of it you're cringing at because in the same way that there are things in soccer and other things that we do that we just kind of accept, and now when we look back at them, we say, well, it probably wasn't right, and in terms of the stuff that you do, this situation with chefs and the way they treat people, and there have been movies and documentaries made about this. It comes to the fore in this.
A little bit of power trip.
It's a power trip, but it's just kind of accepted that you scream and yell at them and you do all this kind of stuff, and you see some of this, and again, you're left going, well, he might have been a great chef, and he might have, felt that this is what he needed to do, but maybe there are different ways to skin a cat going forward. But it's a fascinating look into, again, the restaurant industry, the coming of age of foodies and food and all that kind of stuff with the Food Networks and all that kind of stuff, and then these larger-than-life types of celebrities that these chefs have now become as they diversify and do all that kind of stuff. But a fascinating look called Love, Charlie out there. I think that's also on Netflix. All right, my friend. Are you ready to light this candle?
Let's light it, Lex. Let's go.
All right, away we go. Okay, as promised, right off the top here, Doug McIntyre, our Fox Soccer reporter and our U.S. men's national team insider. Welcome, Doug. I hear you're in the Great White North again, up there in Montreal, with all those cheaters up there in Canada, but you'll muddle through. Okay, let's get right into it. It's kind of gone quiet when it comes to the U.S. men's national team and the vacancy right now. Are you hearing anything, or is it as quiet up there as it is down here?
I don't know if I agree that it's quiet, Alexi. I mean, we've heard in the last couple of days all about Pellegrino Matarazzo and that he's been offered the job. I had one person tell me, and this is not confirming anything, but telling me that was accurate, that was true. And then I had someone else tell me that it wasn't. So the latest that it seems is that it's something that's not happening. I'm going to try to get this right, but Florian Plettenberg, who works for Sky Sports in Germany, about 2 hours before we're recording this, said that Matarazzo is expected to stay at Hoffenheim. So his contract there is up at the end of the year. It might be a typical agent play to try to leverage getting an extension. I do believe there was some smoke to the reports out of Germany over the weekend, both from Bild and Kicker, and I believe Sky Sports Germany as well. So there's some truth to it, but the idea that there was an announcement imminent, I think is wrong. And by the way, I don't think we're going to get any announcement over the next week here, as long as the U.S. women's national team is involved in the Olympics. I don't think U.S. soccer would want to upstage them, but it doesn't feel like we're close to getting a new coach for the men's national team, this week at least, and maybe even before the friendly against Canada in September.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Obviously, with the U.S. team into the the semifinals and all that kind of stuff, so I can understand that. And I think, look, we've all been around the game and we've seen how agents immediately, it's like catnip as soon as they see that there is a vacancy, and they will use it to their advantage, especially when their clients are in the last year of the deal or negotiating a deal. And look, that's leverage. It's done all in business, so I don't begrudge them doing that. But I think we'll see more and more of that, because I do think that this is a valuable and a desirable type of position, whether you're using it for leverage or whether you actually want to do it. Again, maybe some malaise has crept in the way that I feel it, or some apathy. If it was Matarazzo the other day when that whole thing came out, I said, name him or don't name him. It's fine. Let's go. Let's just kind of do something. And I know that kind of runs counter to kind of to want to get this one right and how important this is. But at some point, let's get this thing done and move on with whoever it is, man, woman, or child. Stu.
Look, I think that is the hardest part when it comes to this search. Is just about everybody has been throwing their name in the hat. And Doug, I'm curious, even as we continue to move this forward. I mean, even from a U.S. soccer perspective, they had a search the previous time and they hired Greg Berhalter. How many of those names do you feel that were in the mix the first time are still in the mix this second time now? Because, we hear the likes of Vieira and Cherundolo and Matarazzo. And look, everybody is being linked with this job because they know now U.S. Soccer has said, look, we don't care. We have the money to pay whoever we feel is the best candidate for the job. And some big names have taken themselves out of the mix. But what's the sense you're getting at how big this pool is realistically from what you're hearing versus actually what that is on the ground?
I mean, there's two ways to look at it, right? U.S. is a top 15 national team in the world. So anytime a top 15 job opens, there's going to be interest. There's only so many coaching jobs to go around at the club level. also. But I mean, the reality that I think U.S. soccer is running into here is that the club game is still where most coaches want to be. And, you can swing for the fences. You can go after Jurgen Klopp or any big name you want. But reality will set in at some point. And there are plenty of coaches that I think would be willing to take U.S. soccer's money. But finding the right fit is not, it's not as easy as just being able to write a check. It doesn't work like that. So I'm not sure that the pool is as, I do agree it's a desirable job, but I mean, is it as desirable as a job in the Premier League? Is it as desirable as a job in the Bundesliga? I mean, I wrote last month, even before Greg Berhalter was let go as U.S. coach, a list of potential candidates. And right up top, I said, Pellegrino Matarazzo is probably not going to leave a Bundesliga job to take the U.S. gig. And it appears that that's, the case. So I do think that the U.S. will land on somebody. I think they'll, I think when you spend money, you do get quality. But the fact that it's not happening as quickly as I think some people expected shows that it's not as simple as just snapping your fingers and making a hire.
Yeah, Doug, that's a great segue to what I want to talk about next, which is the Olympic team and their performance on the men's side, losing to Morocco 4-0 in the quarterfinal. Because I think it speaks to your point about, look, we could talk about Jurgen Klopp's and Pep Guardiola's. The reality is that these coaches have to want to coach the United States and the players and the pool that we have. And you're in this case, you're putting your reputation on the line for what you also have to feel is a group of players that you can perform with and get and achieve those expectations. So for you, what was the biggest takeaway coming out of that Olympic performance? Because there was some good, some bad, and I don't even know if we're really left with too many players that I feel are going to really be in the mix for 2026.
No, I agree with you, Stu. And I think things can change quickly. 2 years is a long time in soccer, as we know. So it's hard to judge this Olympic team now. If 2 years from now, Tanner Tessman has worked himself into a starting job with the U.S. and really he used this experience playing in front of big crowds and in hard games. We're watching the highlights of the low lights from a U.S. perspective, the Morocco game. I mean, some really good players on that team, a great atmosphere. So it's hard to judge right now. I mean, part of me says U.S. hadn't been in the Olympics in 16 years. Not only do they get back, they do make it out of the group. They do get to the knockout stage, something the senior team wasn't able to do at Copa America on home soil. But then they get thumped by a much better team in Morocco. And again, it's a reality check where, maybe where U.S. soccer is at the moment. But, I don't even like to say that because the Olympics are wonky on the men's side. It's not best on best. It really depends how fortunate you are, how lucky you are, or how much you prioritize the tournament to get your best players. We saw Morocco with Hakimi, right? I mean, that's the equivalent of having Christian Pulisic play on this Olympic team. And if he had, then maybe things would have turned out differently or your top players or what have you. So it's really hard to judge. I think we're going to find out in the months and years to come. I like Kevin Paredes. I thought he did a good job, particularly in the last couple games, not the last game, obviously, against Morocco. But he's another guy to keep an eye on. But to your point, Stu, there weren't enough of those guys. And that's something that I think is a concern for the player pool going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all obviously disappointed in the U.S. not just losing, but losing badly. And that's really what it comes down to. Because in an interesting way, it mirrored what I think a lot of people thought was going to happen in the Copa America, right? So yeah. With that type of group where you win the games that you're supposed to, and then you face one of these big teams. And, when you look at Morocco, they were much better than the U.S., and it reflected in the score. And so it's not necessarily losing to Morocco, it's how you lost to Morocco, and then we play it forward, and our players coming out, and all that kind of stuff. And so, again, maybe we take a step back and say, all right, well, we hadn't been to the Olympics in a while, and now we're back, and so that's what you rest your hat on going forward. But, to your point, Stu, over the years, we have used it as an incubator. We have used it as the Olympic team as an opportunity to see some of these players. And it's 2 years. A lot can happen in 2 years. It's 2 years is not a lot of time, but still a lot can happen. And in the past, we have seen not just one or two players, but sometimes groups matriculate up to the full team. And I don't think after watching this team at the Olympics, everybody's saying, oh, my goodness. Yes, there were a couple of good performances, but ultimately it was congratulations to get back to the Olympics. but again, more of the same and this inward-looking existential type of conversation that we have about what we are, and we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. On the other side, in terms of flipping the script and changing and moving forward and evolving, you have the U.S. women's national team. Doug, when you look at this U.S. women's national team, we can see on the surface, certainly, the changes that have been made, the move with Emma Hayes, and that is, ultimately that is resulting in the U.S. back to places it has been before, but there seems to be this breath of fresh air and this turning of a corner that is happening. Are we getting lulled into a false sense of excitement and complacency when it comes to this U.S. women's national team and everything's rosy and fine going forward? Or is it worth our time right now and worth all of our excitement as to what's happening?
I think it is, Alexi. I mean, this team is playing with the swagger that they had earned over so many years of unprecedented success on the women's side. And it's amazing to see because, what do you attribute it to? It's the same, obviously there's been changes since last summer. I was down under as you guys were. I was with the women's team in Australia and in New Zealand. And they were terrible. And there's no way to sugarcoat that. They were not a good team in that tournament. It was very clear to me very early on that they were not going to make much noise in that tournament. And it was kind of shocking because I had been with them 4 years earlier in France, where it never looked for a second to me through the course of 7 games, I think it was, that the U.S. team wasn't going to win that World Cup. I mean, they were barely tested. They were far and away the best team in that tournament. So it's been fun to watch. And I think it speaks to the difference that a coach like Emma Hayes can make just basically by walking in the room. I mean, I think people, they discount the vibes in a locker room. But, when you have someone like that with that presence as your coach, when you look around the room and you start to believe that you can play. And look, we knew the talent was there. And obviously last summer, certain things happened. A team caught between 2 generations. Mal Swanson, who's been great in these Olympics, wasn't there, got hurt right before. She had been the best player for the U.S. in early 2023. We talk about 2 years being a long time. Even a year can be a long time. Trinity Rodman looks like a completely different player than she did last summer. She's playing with more confidence. Sophia Smith, who had that great opening game and then really struggled the rest of the World Cup last year. She's been terrific. So, no, I don't think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think fans should be right to be excited. And I think based on what we've seen, there's no reason the U.S. can't be in that gold medal game on Sunday. And I would love to see, and I'm sure you guys would too, a match against Spain, the World Cup champions, for an Olympic gold medal.
Yeah, Lex, I'm glad I got the call up here today because I feel like Mossy would ding you up on this as well. I do remember a conversation that we had on this podcast about this Olympics with the women's team, and you were kind of like, I don't care what happens. Let's use this as a development, and this is all about the next cycle and the next World Cup. Have you changed your thinking around that? Because to me, it was always the expectation. I don't care who. It's the U.S. women in a major tournament. They should be expected to at least be in the final. I haven't backed off of that.
It was all relative to the World Cup. And if Emma Hayes has been hired to win things. Yeah. And obviously she's well along now when it comes to the Olympics. It's certainly in sight. A medal is certainly on the offing right now. That's nothing that hasn't been done before. But what I was talking about is at the end of this summer, when this Olympic pathway is done, if it ends at a gold, fine, whatever, we should all look around and say, man, this is something that is exciting going forward, and I am much more positive and bullish about this team relative to winning the World Cup, which to me is the ultimate goal. And that's ultimately what Emma's going to be.
Are you there, or do we still need to beat Germany once again?
I do think that the changes have helped. I certainly think that there will be some twists and turns along the way, but this is a lot more exciting team. This is a lot more positive in terms of the way that they are playing right now. And to Doug's point, I think having that new person in the room, in this case Emma, and she comes in and she doesn't suffer fools, and it's her way or the highway, and the new sheriff in town and all the different things that you can. I think you have seen that in the way that this is played out. And to be fair, she made some changes that maybe Vlatko could have made at the time, but didn't. Yeah. That were kind of just there in the offing and were normal going forward. When we spin it off, and we've talked about the men's team, we've talked about the women's team, let's talk a little bit about the youth team here. Our under-20s who lost in the final, but they still qualified for the World Cup. Doug, when it comes to our under-20 men right now, again, it goes back to, is there anybody here that we have seen that potentially could matriculate up? Is this an exciting thing? Is this something new that we are seeing right now when it comes to the youth part of the setup for the U.S. National teams?
Yeah, I mean, look, we always want to know who the next crop is coming up. That seems to be something that, for decades now at U.S. Soccer, the current guys are no good. Who's coming up in the pipeline next? I'm a little hesitant to anoint any player from an under 20 team too early. I think there's a lot of danger in doing that. We have a bad habit of doing that in the United States. Nemfasha Berchemans is a guy that I think everyone's excited about. Just 16 years old, scored in the final against Mexico. If it's going to be anybody that comes up from this team to play a role in 2026, you have to think it would be an attacking player, a forward. Is it realistic to expect Berchemans or anybody else, to be playing in a World Cup at 18 years old? I don't know about that. So I really do feel like it's still people don't want to hear this anymore, but it's still a young senior team, right? It's still, you have guys like Serginho that's still 23 years old. It's hard to believe, and everyone's kind of in that period where they're not even quite in their prime yet. So for me, it's like, don't expect any help from the outside. There's talent, more talent in the U.S. team than we saw this summer in the senior team. And they're going to have to figure out, along with their new coach, because that's by and large, with a few exceptions, that's pretty much the same team we're going to see in 2026. And they're going to have to get better individually and as a team. And I mentioned Trinity Rodman before, the evolution she made over the course of a year. It's going to take players like Weston McKennie and Yunus Musa and Brennan Aronson and even Christian Pulisic to get better over the next 2 years, to reach levels that they haven't, in order to have a successful 2026 World Cup. I don't think you can hope that a 16-year-old kid that's scoring goals in the under 20 CONCACAF championship is going to come in and be a key part of that team. It'd be great if it happens, but we certainly can't count on that, and I don't know how realistic that is, really.
Well, yeah, because we don't have
one of the things. I just want to make sure that everybody understands. One of the things that Mossy had threatened to do, and because his flight was canceled, he's not here, was to come in and talk for 20 minutes about the under 20s. And so I am so glad that he is not here to be able to do this, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on the under 20s. Yeah. And if it happens, it happens. But this conversation about who is there and potentially could they be? We always want the next big thing. And to Doug's point, this is a very young, full national team.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but ultimately, I think it does create opportunities for players.
So here's my number one thing when it comes to young players, because we can talk about 16-year-old players. Lamine Yamal was one of the best players at the Euro this past summer. You have to play games. And this has been the biggest problem with our senior national team right now. All of these guys have gone to Europe, and only about half of them are actually playing consistent minutes with big teams. It doesn't do you any good for your development. And if we're going to talk about a 16-year-old being an 18-year-old at a World Cup for the United States in 2026, even Berchemans has only played 21 minutes this season, 3 games for Charlotte FC. So you're going to play with the U20s. You're going to look good against kids your age. But at a World Cup, you're playing against everybody. And I just see too many young players fall into this trap and going to clubs and falling in love with the brand names, but not playing games. It stunts your development, and it happens to goalkeepers. And Doug, it's a nice transition into a player I'm going to ask you about next, Gio Reyna, like one of the most excited young talents we've had for a long time, was playing at Dortmund, then he wasn't, then he goes to Forest, he doesn't play at Forest. Like, where does he go from here? Because to me, the guy's got to make a move, because it doesn't seem like he's in the plans at Dortmund, and these are hugely important period of his development.
I agree completely. I mean, the answers in your questions, Stu. He's got to play wherever he goes. He's got to go somewhere he can play at. There was whispers he might be have been involved with the Olympic squad for that reason, to give him some minutes. I think the thought was that a transfer could happen during the games, and they didn't want to do that. But in hindsight, how great would it have been to have Gio Reyna on the Olympic team, and getting to play. He did play for the U.S. Started every game of the Copa America. But he has to play every week with his club, like you said, Stu. So wherever, that has to be the priority. I think the priority in January was get me to the Premier League. I want to play in the Premier League. It's the best league in the world. He accomplished that, but he didn't get many minutes, and I don't think he helped his development any or helped his stock really, and proved that to other potential suitors. We knew it was a loan deal and that he wasn't going to stay there. That he can be a big part of things going forward. And it's really difficult as an attacking player. I mean, there's lots of good players around the world, and it's hard to get those spots. Gio, still a young guy, still only 21, till almost the end of this year, but he has to make sure that it's not his ego or his agent's pocketbook driving the decision. He has to go somewhere where he can play. He has to bet on himself. That means taking a pay cut to go to the French league or the Dutch league or somewhere else and work himself back to the top level. Then that's what he needs to do, because I think we all see the talent, but that doesn't mean anything if you're not playing week in and week out. And Greg Berhalter played Gio Reyna even though he wasn't playing week in and week out. He can't rely or count on the new coach, whoever that is, to do that. And I would hope that the first thing the next U.S. coach does when he walks into that room or when he has meetings with players is, you guys have to be playing. If you're not playing at club level, don't expect to get called in. There's always exceptions based on circumstances, but that has to be the bottom line, because that's something that's hurt the U.S. team recently for sure.
All right, a couple other players and names when it comes to playing and potential moves. And some of this is relative to playing. Some of it is they're valuable. Some of it is, just a change of scenery. We got Tanner Tessman. We got Weston McKennie and, out there with rumors. Tim Ream, we're hearing today, coming back to MLS with Charlotte. I don't know how much Tim Ream is going to feature going forward. Matt Turner, I think that's a big deal, because I do think, as great as Matt Turner has been over the last years, I do think, even though he's the incumbent, I think that there is a real challenge and an opportunity. And this is what happens when you don't play. And then when you do play, the mistakes that you make are, they're exaggerated at times, because you give an opportunity for others to come along to possibly take that. So, Doug, any hearing on anything when it comes to those folks out there in terms of moves going forward?
Not a ton on those guys specifically, although I think we're going to certainly see moves, as it usually happens toward the end of the window when teams get settled. Other teams start scrambling. They're trying to fill spots. People get more desperate. You might have more leverage as the deadline approaches. But one guy that wouldn't shock me if he moved from MLS to Europe, and the guy who was involved in the Olympics, is John Tolkien, who I thought also had a good games. He's a left back. There's not many of those produced by the U.S. And there's an opening there. I mean, obviously Anthony Robinson, Jedi, is the incumbent for sure, but if he gets hurt, it's pretty much wide open behind him. Chris Lund had been Berhalter's choice as the understudy for Jedi, but there's an opening there if someone plays well, and if someone moves through. We saw Caleb Wiley, another left back, earn a move to Chelsea. He's going to go on loan to Strasbourg in the French league. But I don't think that'll be the last move we see from the Olympic squad this summer. You mentioned Tessman. Looks like he's going to go to Fiorentina. I'm curious to see what he does in his second stint in Serie A with a little bit of a better team. But as far as everyone else, I think it's the same thing as Gio Reyna. You got to play. You have to make sure you're playing every week. That goes for Matt Turner, goes for Weston McKennie, and on down the line. So very important window, I think, for all these players. And even more so because of the uncertainty regarding who the next coach of the national team is going to be.
All right. Well, listen, we will keep an eye on all of these different things, and we'll keep an eye on you when it comes to, potential moves and news out there. We thank you for coming on the State of the Union, as always, my friend. Continue to enjoy your life up there in the Great White North, like I said, with the Canadians up there.
You learn how to fly a drone yet, Doug?
No, he's not a drone flyer. He is an honest man up there. Maybe the only one up there in Canada. We love you, Dougie. All right, be good, my friend. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Again, appreciate Doug McIntyre coming on with us here. Stu, I want to, because you're here, I felt like we should talk a little bit more about Spain and what certainly has happened over the years, but more importantly, the way that they've kind of reinvented themselves, certainly on the men's side, and kind of come to the fore when it, not kind of, have come to the fore when it comes to the women's side. And Spain right now is having a moment. For those that don't know, you are a part owner when it comes to Mallorca over there. You certainly know that league. We talk about that league. We talk about the players and everything that is happening out there. What do you think when you look at what's happening with these national teams and the individual talent that they are producing? Is there something in the water? Is there a special sauce? And also, I ask you this because, we get to ask this question all the time. What aren't we doing, or what should we be doing relative to some of these great countries that are producing great players and great teams?
Yeah. it's a detailed conversation. You know, it's got so many layers to it, and I think a couple of the things have stood out to me. I've been a part of Mallorca now in Spain for 8 years, so I've seen the ins and outs. I've seen youth development. I've seen senior team stuff. I think first and foremost, there's a national identity to the way that they play soccer, and kids grow up playing in this 4-3-3 system, but it's more about the technical development of being comfortable in the ball, and they progress through that. And look, Spain had this golden period where they won the World Cup in 2010 and the Euro in 2008 and 12, and then they had kind of a down couple of years, but it wasn't because their youth teams were still doing supremely well. What they've been able to marry in this most recent Euro is that tiki-taka type of style and technical style, but now with some explosiveness too. But kids all grow up understanding and knowing with the ball is so comfortable and close to their foot. And I think that is such a fundamental part of soccer. The youth development part too is interesting. They don't really keep score at youth levels in soccer up till a certain age. I don't know the exact age, so I don't want to be misquoted here on that. But it's all about letting these kids express themselves and have freedom with the ball and playing games. But it's all not the focus on the score. And I'm around youth development in this country with my daughter who's 8 years old, and it's all about the score. And it's all about parents being like, oh, our team won 6-4 and we're into the next round. I mean, they just let these kids play. So what does that do? I think it allows kids the freedom to make mistakes and not feel afraid to make mistakes within games and learn from those experiences. But also there's very minimal coaching and less interjecting about you need to do this. They figure it out themselves. So I think that develops a high IQ player and soccer players. And look at guys like Rodri and Pedri, Gavi, Lamine Yamal. I mean, these guys are just so elite in the way that they think and feel and see the game. So it's not, of course, that they don't get coaching. They get a ton of coaching, but they allow these moments for these kids to really just develop and play. They're playing all the time. There's a huge soccer culture in Spain. The other part that I've been thinking about a lot is they're one of the strictest countries in financial fair play and the way in which they really enforce those regulations on their clubs. Now, say what you want about Barcelona. Barcelona had a lot of these issues that they were in financially because of overspending, overextending, and it's why they've once again gone back to like having a real emphasis on youth development and La Masia, because I think a lot of Spanish clubs, Mallorca's included in this. We can only spend a certain amount of money every single year on our salary cap based on your revenue, league position over a number of years. So we have to try to develop players and bring them through our youth academies. So a lot of these Spanish clubs spend a lot of money on youth development, great coaching, great emphasis, giving opportunities to players at a younger age. I think you saw a lot of this conversation around the Euro when they were talking about Italy and Lamine Yamal. They're saying, well, Lamine Yamal, he'd be on loan in an Italian third division club, and you wouldn't really know who he is because they don't give the same opportunities to young players. Barcelona were like, hey, 16 years old, you're good enough, kid. We're going to give you a chance in the first team. Xavi saw that. He's played now, I think, 2 years at the first team level. 17 years old. He's one of the best players in the world. So it's hard to really pinpoint it on one issue, but these are a couple of the things as I was thinking about this conversation on the way in that I've seen from these young kids. And even, I saw a clip go viral of Real Madrid and Barcelona, U13, U14. I was like, what am I watching here? These kids are thinking and seeing and turning out of space and recycling the ball. And they know how they're so comfortable with the ball at their feet that everything else kind of comes along with it.
So obviously the proof is in the pudding in terms of the success that they are having, but I want to go back to something you said about not keeping score, because this concept is nothing new. We've talked about this before, and you got to let them grow and you got to let them make mistakes and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the other side of the argument where people have come out and said, and this doesn't just apply to soccer, it applies to sports in general, of like, oh, everybody gets a trophy, and nobody makes any mistakes, and you didn't do anything wrong. And probably it's somewhere in the middle. And to your point, it's also a mentality and a cultural thing. If there's an acceptance or a pushing away of something like that. But if you were to try to implement, no scores, first off, the argument has always been the kids are going to keep score anyway, right? Yeah. So, and secondly, as I mentioned, people are going to say, yeah, but if you don't keep score, why aren't you prioritizing actually winning? Which ultimately is what everybody cares about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, I have a hard time with that, an internal dilemma with that too, because I try to create environments, and I know this was for me too.
And you have young kids playing.
I was insanely competitive, and that came from playing against my brother and and playing against my teammates, and everything was with the goal of like, I'm not going to be beat. I want to win that game. So I still think that there's situations, even if you're not technically keeping score and you're not avoiding trophies at the end of every single tournament, there's of course situations where, as you said, the kids are gonna be like, we're up 5-4. I don't see any less competitive kids when I go over. These kids all still want to compete and win and score goals. But I mean, winning in that they're scoring goals, they're getting the best of their opponent, but it's not all just about the team winning and winning every single game. Sure. And therefore those players that help you win in that moment end up being the ones that get accelerated further. Whereas, and I think this has been a conversation recently in U.S. soccer circles, is that we prioritize our athletes so young, and it's all about the kids that are most athletic, and the more talented kids, or that have the potential to be more talented, or the smarter kids within the game, get kind of knocked aside. I think there's a way that you can kind of marry both of those and coach up the better athletes on the technical side, but also still allow opportunities for, I don't know, the smaller technical guy. That was me. You know, I wasn't the biggest, the tallest. I'm still not the biggest and tallest, but I found ways to compete and win and compete with those kids as well.
You play big, buddy. You play big.
Yeah.
Last question before we take a little break here. You mentioned financial fair play. Do you think that is an internal type of thing that happens in terms of the adherence to financial fair play, as opposed to other countries and cultures where either they don't care about it, they're more lax about it? Because when it comes to La Liga, there is still a have and have not type of separation that goes on. And when you're in Mallorca, yes, you got to make more with less, but are you just self-governing, or is that coming from the top?
No, I've sat with our club president and our CEO, and he ran me through this. I mean, it's like there's the financial fair play body, and then there's an independent La Liga one that is separate to that. And you know, this was difficult during the COVID years, where our revenue was next to nothing from ticket sales. Nobody in the stadiums. We rely heavily on ticket sales and season ticket holders and all these different things. And we had to, find ways to, either with capital calls and different things, to make sure that we satisfied what we needed to from a La Liga financial fair play element, to make sure that we could spend what we needed to on the budget for next year. So there's financial fair play, there's UEFA, then there's La Liga, and it's tough, man. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's why La Liga is in a good position financially. Of course, you still have Real Madrid and Barcelona at the top of that, and they get more money, and they should. But one of the big things over the past decade, and why I think La Liga has done well, is they recognize, and they saw what is happening in the Premier League, the amount of money that is going into that league and how big it has become. And they said, we've got to start to, bring up the other part of the league. It can't just be a two-team league. So Atletico needs more money. Bilbao needs more money, and even the smaller teams, we need more money from TV to be able to invest more in our teams and make the league more competitive. So it's a difficult equation. And even for us, we're trying to break from that, lower half table team into the top half. And you have to be in the top half for a certain number of years. It means you have to spend more. You can't spend more. So you have to be creative in the ways that you do it, but it's fun.
Well, I was with you years ago when you got promoted, and, I saw the excitement. But to your point, with that comes added responsibility and added cost. And I think you, and obviously the ownership there, has done an incredible job. So kudos to you.
Well, our first game coming up on the 18th is
exactly
Real Madrid.
You're only as good as your last game. So far, so good.
Mbappe's first game at Mallorca. Fun. Let's go.
You're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine. And I know you enjoy doing that. All right, so best of luck to your Mallorca team going forward here in the new La Liga season. And thanks for talking about that. All right, let's take another quick break. When we come back, it's time for Ask Alexi. Okay, welcome back. It's time for Ask Alexi, that time of the show where you send in your comments, questions, and concerns over there on the social media platforms. If you do it there, and keep in mind that our handle is SOTU with Alexi, or you can call into our State of the Union podcast hotline, which again is 657-549-2297, 657-549-2297. Before we get into Ask Alexi, Stu, we are in the midst of the, what are we calling this? Leagues Cup going on right now. Real quick. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I mean, obviously, it's the second year. We were in Australia and watching it from afar last summer at the Women's World Cup, and I was riveted by it. You talked about watching the Olympics. I know soccer is part of our DNA, but I was just interested in it. And yes, they got lightning in a bottle when it comes to Messi and stuff like that. So what do you see happening when it comes to the future of this Leagues Cup before we get into
I think last year was the perfect scenario for them because Messi and Miami went on that run. I'm kind of meh on it so far.
Yeah,
I think I can get excited by the knockout stage. The group stage still for me, and I think this is a big problem for consumer messaging as well. I went to LAFC Vancouver Leagues Cup game, not a league game. I went the other day, went to penalties. It was kind of exciting at the end. So you get one less point for winning on penalties.
Right.
And I was trying to figure out, even like looking at the three team groups of who's going where. And I still even have a hard time because I'm not like really paying attention deeply of who's going to advance and who's not. This tournament is all about Liga MX versus MLS, and that's what makes it sexy to me. Not seeing Nashville versus LAFC for the 50th time, or the Galaxy playing, Vancouver or San Jose. Like it's real knockout games when you have Liga MX and MLS, and I think that's going to be now the fun part starting as we kind of whittle that down and get into the bracket. So I'm ready to be wowed again, I would say. You feel the same? Yeah.
I think the same. There's a lot of teams, obviously, and there's a lot of games that are going on right now. And now we're into the round of 32. And so, these one-off types of games, I think, are going to be interesting. And as we get closer and closer, I think it will become more and more interesting. But it'll be interesting if they do tweaks going forward, either on or off the field, things that they do to make it more appealing, to make it more exciting. But as we've said time and time again, this cooperation and this partnership between Liga MX and MLS, that is not going anywhere. And to your point, Stu, I think that is something that people are interested in and get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, look, did you see Houston, though? Just the last one? Miami played Tigres in front of a packed-out crowd. And,
they're getting big crowds, and they're getting some sparse crowds here or there, too. So obviously it depends on the opponent. All right, let's get into Ask Alexi here. JT Real 2023 asked me over there on the X machine. Here he said, Alexi, serious question. So this is serious then. Where is America failing when we have considerably more resources to invest in a national team program? I'm sure he's talking about. Yet we are losing spectacularly to smaller countries with a fraction of the resources. The gap simply doesn't make sense to the average sports fan. All right, so this is an evergreen type of question and confusion out there, JT Real. A couple of things to keep in mind here. If size mattered, okay, China and Russia and India and these types of countries would be crushing everybody. And they're not. And notwithstanding what Brazil has done over the years. Also, if size mattered, Stu wouldn't be married. But another thing. Number two. And I think, Stu, I think you mentioned this a little bit when we were talking earlier in the show. America's great diversity when it comes to us as a country, I think it makes us great. But I also think that it creates soccer challenges. And we have very little collective cultural agreement of how to play. And I've said this time and time again, but it bears repeating. You ask 100 soccer people what pretty soccer is, and you're going to get 100 different answers. Where Stu grew up down in Texas, the way they think about soccer can be very, very different than where I grew up in Michigan or out in California, stuff like that. And that's relative to the upbringing that you have, the geography, the obviously the ethnic background, the coaches that you have, the weather, all sorts of different things. And that's literally that is relative to the size of our country. The other thing is, and number three is, while the rest of the world certainly has a huge, huge head start when it comes to what, right now we're talking about the men's team because I've told you that the women's team has had a huge head start. The U.S. also, it should be noted, has made great strides. So I know in this time, this existential type of moment where we're questioning what we are and what we aren't, when it comes to the national team program, I know we want to win a World Cup, a men's World Cup. Okay, first off, that's not a panacea. That doesn't change everything automatically. Don't get me wrong. I would love for it to happen. It would be wonderful, and it certainly would be a wonderful injection over there. But that also doesn't discount all of the good and all of the progress and all of the evolution that has happened when it comes to not just soccer, but in this case, I know you're specifically talking about the national team program out there. And so you shouldn't just throw all of that away because the U.S. didn't do well in a Copa America this summer, or the U.S. men's team has not won a World Cup. And again, I'm not being Pollyanna. I am not sitting here saying that we don't have problems. I'm also not sitting here saying that you, JT, or anybody else shouldn't hold the U.S. men's national team, shouldn't hold the leadership, whether it's from the top when it comes to JT Batson or Cindy Parlow-Cone, or obviously the head coach that existed in the past, or head coaches that are going to exist in the past, hold their feet to the fire and say this is not good enough. We expect better. But if you're just going to relate everything that happens in soccer with the success or the failure of the men's national team, then I think you're discounting a lot of good that has happened ultimately over the years. I don't know if I ultimately answered your question there, but the gap, we talked to Dougie Mack earlier on the show, and he said, yeah, we're a top 15 team. We absolutely are. And we have consistently been a top 15 team. And if you look at the progress that soccer has made over the last 40 years, it's unprecedented how far we have come. And I know we don't have that moment. And I know it hurts when we don't do well. But it also doesn't mean that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or that we are horrible, or we are not progressing, or that our national team ultimately sucks.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. Yeah, I think you did answer the question. You and I have this. These are like an evergreen bar conversation for us as well. At the end of the night, it's like, how can we solve American soccer and all of our problems? And you've even, I think, raised this as part of that of, well, what if we made our national teams only from California, Texas, Florida, and New York, New Jersey, and like
might be more successful, might be easier,
right?
And
you said everybody in those regions, you got to get to those states, and that's where we're going to prioritize youth development. We're going to pile money in. I don't know. What would happen from that? Because I remember growing up in Texas, North and South Texas were the two best states in our region, along with Florida. California basically always made up Region 1 of the ODP national team. New York, New Jersey was a hotbed. I mean, those were, and it makes sense. It's where the most population, most of the money's invested, and everything that goes along with it. I think we can continue to invest in coaching. I think coaching, I see it so much at the youth level, is just severely lacking, lack of resources, too many parent coaches. Not that that's not a good thing, but just look, the reality is we haven't had the same soccer culture or developed soccer culture. I know we have an immensely deep soccer culture here, but a lot of these parents and people are newer to the sport in the way that we know it. And I think sometimes we can be the best and the worst, and that we exclude so many people and don't welcome people into the tent and help these people that want to know and understand the sport in a different way. It's a long road, and I think that too often times it does get boiled down to the most recent results, and everybody's like, blow it all up, what's happening? We've invested more money than we've ever invested in the history of our country in this sport in these past 6-8 years, always with an eye on this 26 World Cup. And you're not going to see the results of many of this for another, 8-10 years. That next group of players that's come through MLS Next Pro and GA Academies and ECNL and all the acronyms that you want. So I am more bullish on youth soccer in America than I think the overwhelming opinion seems to be, because I do think we're producing more and more players these days on the men's and women's side, and there's more resources and more urgency and more of an understanding that we need to keep spending, we need to keep investing in coaching education to start to compete with the world elites.
Yeah, I mean, let's finish it here. Whoever is named as the head coach of the men's national team is going to come in, and I hope, again, that they do big, bold things. I hope that they want to do something in the next less than 2 years now. Okay, there's only so much that they can do, but I hope that they lay down the law in the same way that Emma has for the women's side. I hope that they make some of those hard choices, and I hope they define. Whether you agree with it or not, to be quite honest, is not my concern. There will be many that won't agree with it, but at least I want somebody with a plan and say, this is how we're going to play. Come hell or high water, this is how we're going to play. And I know it's going to turn some people off, but at least I would rather have what you perceive as a flawed plan than no plan at all from whoever comes in. Real quick before we get to one for the road, I got asked over there on the X machine, would you smoke weed with Snoop Dogg? Snoop Dogg's all the rage right now. You were talking about the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. I know we could talk a lot of. If I were to smoke, and a hand to God, I have never smoked in my life, but if I were to smoke, I would want to do it with an expert and a professional. So that's, obviously your Snoop Doggs and your Willie Nelsons and others out there. So absolutely, if I were to smoke, I would absolutely do it with Snoop Dogg.
Smoke Dogg. Yeah, I mean, they both work. And hell yeah, I would. Are you kidding me?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take another quick break. When we come back, it's time for One for the Road. Okay, welcome back. It's the end of our show, and at the end of each and every show, I give you my One for the Road. If you would like to roll it, you can certainly do that right now. Mossy isn't here. He just loves to throw to this and see us in the van running around here. Really interesting. I think over the years I've talked about my friend Max Bretos. Max Bretos, the voice of LAFC. Yes, exactly. I don't throw around the word legend a lot, but he is a legend when it comes to soccer, and he's been doing it forever. Well before I was involved in television, he's been around. Now he's over at Apple, also doing stuff with their production, their MLS production that they have over there. I just wanted to point this out here. He had what I gotta feel is a wonderful moment in that he has been broadcasting LAFC games and talking about LAFCs, and like I said, talking about soccer for a long time. So much so that now multiple generations have not only grown up listening to him, but have been incredibly influenced by him. And I'm glad you're here, Stu, because you obviously now have been doing this for a number of years. And I'm just going to read this, I guess this was over on Instagram, from Malik, who sent Max Bretos this incredibly heartfelt thank you. And he said, full circle moment. And this is under a picture of Max Bretos with what I think is Malik's son here. Full circle moment meeting you today. I was too starstruck to tell you in person. I moved to this country 23 years ago from Africa, and you played a big part in my adaptation in American culture. I basically learned English listening to you, he's talking about Max Bretos, call games at a time when finding soccer in American TV was nearly impossible. My son and I are now LAFC members, and the three of us share a passion for soccer and love for the best club in the country. In this case, he's talking about LAFC. And, Max Bretos sent him a really nice response here. And obviously he was touched. He said it took his breath away. And I think it's got to be incredibly, emotional and gratifying for someone like Max Bretos, who has been toiling for many, many years. And you should go watch his OG show over there on YouTube also. He's got all sorts of stuff. But for someone that has been toiling for many years, because sometimes in soccer over the years, it's, you put your voice out there and you think it's just going out into the ether. Yeah. And the fact that it is not only touching people, but in this case, teaching people, I think that says a lot about how far soccer has come. I think it says a lot about how important soccer can be in terms of spreading the message, and in this case, like I said, teaching. I think it also says a lot about how far our technology has come. And as I said before, it was just a real heartfelt type of response, and I got to feel that Max Bretos out there, when he goes back now and thinks about all the years and all the hours and all the travel and all the things that he is doing, this has got to make it all worth it. And so, Stu, before we leave, when you are sitting there in front of the microphone, you and John Strong, and you've been doing this now for years, you're incredible at what you do. I think there will come a time, if it hasn't, where there are generations that, for better or worse in your case, Stu, have grown up listening to your voice. And I think you will find that it has, in the greater scheme of things, it's not important, but in the scheme that we are talking about when it comes to soccer, that it does resonate and it does impact people out there. And it's wonderful to see a story like this. I'm sure it will happen, if it hasn't already happened to you. When I meet young people, for lack of a better phrase, out there, and certainly younger than I, and many of them that never saw me kick a ball, never saw me running around with a lot of hair, and only equate me with
shouting and yelling. Yeah,
exactly. Screaming and yelling and doing all that kind of stuff. And on the rare instance that they actually come up and say something nice, it does warm the cockles of my redheaded American soccer heart. And it does make me feel good that we are doing something when it comes to soccer in terms of putting stuff out there that does resonate and does, I guess, for lack of a better word, matter out there.
Yeah, first of all, Max is a great guy. He was calling my games when I was playing in England with the national team and various things. So it's great to see that, and he deserves that moment, I think, from what he's given to the sport. It's one of those things. It's difficult running because you talk about we don't pay so much importance on what we do. We get to talk about soccer for a living. I mean, it's one of the coolest jobs. But I do think that with that comes a great responsibility to people like this, right? That want to consume the sport, that want to love the sport. And I want as many people that listen to us, that watch us, to love the sport the way that we do. And I always hope that comes across on camera. I had a cool moment like after the World Cup in 2018, which was my first World Cup. I get back and my daughter would go to the grocery store. She's 2 aisles over and I'm like, hey, where are you? And I start screaming at her. And this person pops their head around the aisle and they're like, were you the guy that just called the World Cup? And I was like, what? He goes, I recognized your voice. And I was like, whoa, that was like mind-blowing to me. I'd never had that because I had always, I don't know, associated as a player, but now that career feels so secondary and this kind of feels like my job and something that I love. And I don't know, it's happened in moments and people will come up and talk about it, and whether they're just saying it to our face because they want to be nice, I take it with great responsibility every time that I call a game. I never sit there on a microphone and think, oh man, 6 million people are listening or 25 million people in a World Cup final. But you do have understanding of sometimes how big those moments are, and I get it a lot. People that don't and didn't see me play. My last time I kicked the ball was 11 years ago. So the 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids now watching, they never saw me play as a player, and they know me as a broadcaster, and I hope to continue doing this as long as I can, man, like you.
Well, listen, I know
65 years old.
Yeah, right, I know. Listen, I know I bust your balls, but you have a great future. You're incredible at what you do, as is Max Bretos, and the list is long. There's a lot of people out there that have been working very, very hard for a long time. Some of them that are much more prominent than others, but, it takes a village when we're talking about this game. And so, as I said before, just wanted to recognize and honor the great Max Bretos. And I think he was probably incredibly touched and humbled by that moment. But the work goes on, my friend. Thank you for hanging with us today, my friend. Mossy will hopefully be back later on this week. Hopefully he'll be back.
Hopefully he made it this long in the pod too.
We'll see. All right, listen, you got stuff to do. I got stuff to do. We will be back, like I said, later on next week. Keep downloading and reviewing and subscribing and rating and doing all the different things that you do. Until then, and as always, my friends, size the day.